Well, we're joined now by Una Fenke, who is a Greenland Member of Parliament, who joins us now from the capital, Nuuk. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Fenke. We were just listening to a clip of the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer there, saying he doesn't think President Trump is indeed considering military action on Greenland. What do you think? Do you see a forced takeover of your country as being a likely scenario?
I actually agree with Mr. Starmer here, and I don't see a scenario where the US will use military force against an ally. But I think the possibility for using military is against adversaries, and those have been communicated quite clearly from the US administration.
What do people in Greenland want? Is there anyone in Greenland that is audible? And what percentage of the population would you say welcomes this idea and would want to be part of the United States of America?
I think almost everyone. So I couldn't set a percentage on it, but I think over 90% would not be annexed again, ever. We are de facto annexed and been a de facto colony and colonized for 300 years. So I think nobody wants to be annexed again by anyone. We want our external self-determination from our party's end, and we want to negotiate with Denmark according to the law that we have with Denmark and international law. So that's what we are adhering to.
But the Trump administration says that Denmark cannot defend or manage Greenland effectively. Would you agree with him on this?
Yeah, Denmark alone can't do it, but of course, in regards to the alliances that we have, NATO, US is also a part of NATO, and also maybe giving some security guarantees, and also maybe amending the defense and security agreement that Denmark made without the consent of Greenland in 1951, which was amended in 2004, limited the United States to having only one military base in Greenland, and they should have to ask Denmark and Greenland regarding upgrades to the Thule Air Base and also eventually making new bases in Greenland. Then that could be something that we could negotiate on, but we will never negotiate on buying people or buying a country.
Okay, so your sort of face-saving solution to all of this would be a boosted US presence on your national territory. Is that how you think perhaps we might get to a solution to this impasse?
I think we have to listen to what their concerns are, what their interests are in Greenland, and also not necessarily boosting military presence, because people in Greenland doesn't want military presence in our towns, but formerly, the US had bases in areas where it's non-populated by Inuit and Greenlanders. So I think we need to listen to what their interests and concerns are and see what we can do mutually for the national security of us all, especially Greenland and also the United States, and also in regards to international security with the new opening of shipping routes, minerals, oil and gas, and all kinds of stuff that will going to happen here in the future. Because this northwest passage and around the western part and eastern part of Greenland will be of utmost importance in the future.
The United States says that Russia and China pose a credible military threat to Greenland. Is that how it feels where you are?
I don't think that the common people will know that, but if you read the strategy of the Russia in regards to the Arctic and the Northern Sea Road and how they will expand on the military presence and also controlling the waters, I think it is utmost importance for Greenland and also our allies to control the waters and limit the freedom of navigation around these waters in conjunction with the Law of the Sea Convention and, of course, the indigenous people's rights. And we can actually do that in a legal way without force from or threats from any country.
So you agree with the premise. I mean, but you don't seem to agree with the method. Do you think perhaps out of all of this might come something good for Greenland, which is that the country and Denmark as well have been forced to have a long, hard look at the realities of the security of the waters around Greenland and your country's security?
Absolutely. Maybe it's not too much about Greenland, but it's about international and national security of the US also in regards to the Western alliances. So I think we have to be proactive. I think that the time is right, but maybe not that urgent and not with the rhetoric that we hear from the United States right now, but it creates certainly some urgencies. And I really hope that this underdeveloped island will in the future be developed for the good welfare of the Greenlandic people also, and that we can utilize our resources in a way that we can also make more even distribution to the competent competition in regards to critical minerals.
Has this whole standoff perhaps changed the way Greenland and its people view the relationship with Denmark? Because, I mean, there must be people who feel that being part of Denmark, and by extension Europe and NATO, that actually Greenland is safer than it would be if it was fully independent. Is that a line of argument you're hearing much?
It's a little bit difficult because we also get a lot of information from Denmark and a lot of fear-mongering from Denmark. And even though they sterilized our women and girls and also used Inuit as experiments and legal fatherless people and so forth, then people are afraid. Of course, some people are concerned, afraid, and maybe the safest part for some people is to be a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And that is a narrative that is, of course, positive for Denmark for not losing Greenland. But our party is steadfast. Our right to external self-determination is non-negotiable, even from Denmark and the US. We want our self-governance here in Greenland. We want our land back legally. And then we can make bilateral agreements with the countries concerned. Or even a possibility, according to our law, is to make a steadfast union with Denmark that could cement the right for territorial integrity of the island of Greenland, which was basically de facto annexed in 1953 without referendum of the Greenlandic people, which is, of course, used right now from the US as it is a geopolitical competition here that someone can utilize and say you don't have territorial integrity in Greenland because you didn't have a referendum or plebiscite for the Inuit Greenlandic people back then.
I mean, Greenland has been very clear and said we're not for sale. But there will be people out there who say, well, if the price was high enough, I mean, some people would perhaps have a breaking point. What do you say to that? Do you see a tempting offer being placed on the table that's just too good to turn away from?
I think Greenlandic people are resilient and very principle steadfast. No people should be for sale ever again. And that is a very bad premise to bring out to the world. So I think that, of course, we will be open for negotiations in regards to their concerns and security concerns and interest in regards to doing business. Greenland is open for business, and especially from the United States and our nearest allies, we are absolutely open for business in regards to minerals, oil and gas, and tourism and other kinds of businesses.
Okay, and if you had a message to President Trump at this particular moment, and it's said that all options are on the table, what would your message be?
I will just say that respect international law, respect Greenland's right to external self-determination. Greenlandic people will decide upon the future. And after the decision of the Greenlandic people, when we have activated our rights and start negotiations with Denmark, we will be able to communicate on a clearer terms on how we can do things.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thank you very much indeed. Une Fena, Greenland Member of Parliament. Thank you very much indeed, sir.
Thank you.
Well, let's get more now. We're joined by Matt Terrell, who is the former Chief of Staff for Marco Rubio's 2016 presidential campaign, now the managing partner of Firehouse Strategies. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on our program, Matt. Let me just start by asking you first up. I mean, do you think that it's going to come to a military head, this situation?
Well, great to be with you, Tom. And look, I think what President Trump is doing right now is what President Trump does best, and that is working to negotiate. I think right now what you're seeing is President Trump threatening these tariffs, having discussions here with European countries, really with the notion that this is all about negotiation at the end of the day. So we'll see what takes shape here. But I think, look, what you're seeing President Trump do is lean into negotiation discussion. You saw him send in, if you will, his key members of his team, including Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio, to have discussions around this, particularly discussions with Denmark as it relates to next steps here on the U.S. acquiring Greenland. But at the end of the day, it really is all about national security. That's what this is about for President Trump. It's what it's about for the United States, and ultimately for the strength of NATO and European allies. This is about countering China, Russia, and about national security at the end of the day.
Okay, you make a lot of important points there. Let's start by looking at the strategy, the art of the deal that might be at work here. I mean, when you read what President Trump is putting out on social media, and one of the recent messages he put out was there'll be escalating tariffs until such time as a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. That's what President Trump said on Saturday. I mean, it doesn't sound like there's any room whatsoever for compromise here, Matt.
Well, we'll see what takes shape here. Look, I think you're going to see at Davos here, I'm sure, I suspect President Trump coming up here at Davos, talking with leaders about what next steps can look like here, about this acquisition of Greenland. But again, this is how President Trump operates. I think it's actually a strength where you see him not being too predictable here. I think that's one of his strengths, actually, when it comes to his negotiation tactics. And I think these threats of tariffs are just a part of those tactics that he deploys when negotiating. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the result. And what you're seeing right now with President Trump is him really laser focused on this notion of acquiring Greenland. And he's not the first U.S. president to have a focus on acquiring Greenland. You saw, for example, in history that President Truman, a Democrat, looked at acquiring Greenland. You've seen the U.S. acquire land before, whether it's with Louisiana or Alaska. So there's a precedent for what President Trump is doing here. We'll see what next steps looks like here.
Yeah, but all of that was in the years before NATO existed. And, Greenland is essentially under the NATO umbrella as things stand, as a semi-autonomous region of Denmark, which is a NATO member state. I mean, do people really think it's going to change very much? After all, the US has a military base on Greenland already. They're welcome to have as many as they like. But, there are limits. They don't want to be part of the United States. I mean, help me understand those calculations, Matt.
Well, I think for President Trump, he views a couple of things here. First and foremost, that the U.S. has been the biggest funder of NATO, and that's something that he's been clear about and wanting to see NATO countries do more on defense spending, and he's been successful in getting countries to move in that direction. But I think if we zoom out here, this is a part of a bigger strategy for President Trump. If you take a look at what President Trump has been doing, he's been recognizing that the best defense is oftentimes a good offense. When it comes to defending the United States, defending NATO nations, defending the world, it comes down to having a good offense. What we've seen throughout President Trump's second term here in Trump 2.0 is him going on the offense. You saw him do that with respect to Venezuela and the capture of Maduro. We see him do that on Iran when he just a few months ago obliterated their nuclear capabilities. A lot of this has to do with China at the end of the day. What President Trump has been doing, whether it's with Venezuela or maximum pressure on Iran, is trying to counter China. And this is a huge part of that. I mean, if you take a look at where Greenland's at strategically on the map, when it comes to missile defense, when it comes to shipping, these are all things that run straight through Greenland. And that's front and center for President Trump. So we'll see what Greenland wants at the end of the day. But look, I think President Trump's been clear what he wants at the end of the day, and that's national security and recognizing that Greenland's a big part of that.
If you look at the opinion polls, they seem to suggest that the majority of Americans do not support taking Greenland. In fact, quite a number of Americans and even a majority of Republicans, I think only 1 in 5 Republicans is in favor of this course of action. Are there any dissenting voices in the inner sanctum of President Trump, or is everyone in lockstep on this one?
Well, I think you got to be mindful of these polls here. And, look, polls go up and down. They change quite a bit. And to be honest, I'm not so certain that there's a whole lot of Americans who are really, really focused on Greenland right now. I mean, obviously, this is an important issue for national security, and many would argue for the economy of the U.S. and the world. But, look, what Americans are really focused on is their day-to-day lives. And so, I think when you look at these polls, what Americans are really lasered in on are, their pocketbooks. Are focused on the economy, job growth here in the United States, which, has been going quite well in terms of economic growth here in the United States. But pivoting back to Greenland, look, this is an issue that President Trump, I think, has cared about for quite some time, even in his first term. And I think that what in the United States, what the American people voted for in the last presidential election wasn't just on the economy or inflation here in the U.S. It was really on national security. And you've seen President Trump tackle that through border security and immigration here in the U.S. But a big part of that, obviously, was about China and Russia. And Greenland is center to that. If you think about what President Trump wants to do with his Golden Dome, when you think about what President Trump wants to do on missile defense as relates to the Golden Dome, Greenland is center to that. And so I think a lot of this in terms of the polling, we just have to wait and see what takes shape here. And I think the American people voted for President Trump where he has a political mandate. And part of that mandate was on national security. And that's what he's looking to deploy here.
Quite interesting reading what the US Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, had to say. He said that European weakness necessitates US control of Greenland for global security and global stability. Is that how Europe looks to the United States right now? Weak?
Well, I think that President Trump, he has concerns, I suspect, about the ability to defend Greenland and the, investment that needs to be made to do that, the infrastructure needs to be made to do that. That's something I think President Trump is really focused in on here. So I don't think it's about strength or weakness. I think what it's about is a goal at the end of the day, and that is to ensure that Greenland is secure. And I believe that President Trump believes that the United States has the greatest strength to make that happen, that the United States has the strongest ability to make that happen. And look, this is something that you're going to have collaboration on at the end of the day. And I do suspect that coming into Davos here, and I don't want to speak for the president, but I suspect he's going to be focused in on negotiation discussions with world leaders at Davos about Greenland. So I would just encourage people not to rush to judgment on this quite yet. Yes, President Trump is looking at different tactics here and ways to negotiate. I think here you're seeing part of that with the threat of tariffs. But there is I think, a common goal at the end of the day for NATO, European nations with President Trump, and that is safety, security. And I do believe people recognize around the world the threat that China and Russia present. And I think right now, President Trump recognizes that the best security you can have in Greenland, for Denmark, for NATO, for the world, is the United States to step in and provide that security. And we'll have to just wait and see what next steps are here. But I think we'll know soon how these discussions go with world leaders.
Some European leaders say the United States has crossed a red line. How do you think that's going to go down in Washington?
Well, look, I think, candidly, President Trump is focused on what President Trump needs to be doing right now. And I don't think he's worried about other red lines being set by other leaders for him, but what red lines he's setting for nations around the world. And we're seeing right now he's put a red line out there for Iran. That's something that people are watching. Obviously, he's put red lines out there in the past. He did that with Nicolas Maduro. And Nicolas Maduro found out real quick what the Trump doctrine is all about, and that is mess around and find out. So I think President Trump has the strength here. President Trump is in the driver's seat here, and I think world leaders recognize that. So he is the one who is dictating, if you will, where these lines stand in terms of national security for the United States, for the safety and security of the people of the United States. And he genuinely believes that Greenland is centered to that. Again, I go back to, he's not the first U.S. president to believe that. President Truman believed that Greenland was vital for national security purposes. So, this is something that the president has a precedent on to work off of. He's not coming out of left field, if you will, on this desire to acquire Greenland. But look, at the end of the day, his desire, I think, here is to make sure that this works for the security of the world. It's not just about the United States, but ultimately President Trump ran for his second term as president on America First agenda. That was, how do you make America more prosperous, safer, and more secure? And obviously Greenland's a key component of that.
But so too is NATO's solidarity. And the idea that China and Russia pose a threat to US national security and Greenland is key to making sure that it poses less of a threat. I mean, perhaps it could be argued that a serious dispute between the United States and all the other NATO member states and the entirety of Europe, bar perhaps one or two countries, is in fact the biggest gift that could be offered to the Chinese or the Russians. What do you say to that?
What I'd say is I think you're going to see President Trump, again, go back to having discussions with these world leaders. I think that this is, a negotiation at the end of the day, and I think President Trump is in the driver's seat on that. And I do believe that President Trump has worked to actually strengthen NATO. I mean, again, he has really encouraged and drove NATO nations to move in the right direction with respect to increasing defense spending, their own spending on defense. That's been an important, I think, win, not just for the United States, but frankly for NATO and for the world. And so, I think we have to take this step by step here. I do believe there's going to be discussions coming up here. I suspect that the White House, President Trump, are going to have with NATO allies here. And ultimately, I think it comes down to what does success look like? And I do believe it comes down to countering China, countering Russia. And not to be repetitive on this point, but Greenland really is center to that. And you're having other things at play here. You're seeing melting ice that is going to, create new, lanes, if you will, for transit. That's another dynamic taking place here. This is a developing situation in Greenland. But ultimately, I think what President Trump works to do is not just say what's going to be in the best interest of the United States and national security for today or 2 years from now, but what does that look like 20 years from now? And I think he views Greenland as both a micro and a macro play here, that this is for national security for today, but obviously for the years to come. I think he is someone who looks to be proactive on national security threats, and this is certainly, I think, what he's doing right now.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thank you very much indeed. Matt Tyrrell, thank you very much again.
Thanks, Tom.